Her dying sister forced Anya to lie for a brutal crime syndicate. But at the illicit auction, a notorious mafia boss, the collector, shockingly bought the forged art and Anya's desperate silence. When the syndicate retaliated by kidnapping her sister, that ruthless billionaire mafia boss unleashed hell, burning Chicago's underworld to reclaim what was his. Now trapped in his golden cage, does she fight the devil who saved her, or surrender to his dangerous obsession? The biting chill of late autumn in Chicago always seemed to find cracks in Anya Petrova's thin apartment walls, seeping into her bones. It mirrored the pervasive cold that had settled deep within her soul. Dust motes danced in the anemic light filtering through the grimy window panes, illuminating a space that smelled perpetually of antiseptic and faded hope. Anya ran a worn cloth over the carved mahogany leg of a Victorian armchair, the wood smooth beneath her trembling fingertips. This was her sanctuary, her studio, her battleground. Here, among the broken fragments of history and the silent whispers of forgotten beauty, Anya found a fleeting sense of purpose. But even that, like everything else, was now suffocating under a crushing weight. Lena. The name was a fragile whisper on Anya's lips, a constant thrumming ache beneath her ribs. Her younger sister, barely a teenager, battled a rare autoimmune disease, its greedy tendrils slowly stealing her breath, her laughter, her future. The medical bills, an Everest of paper, had long since dwarfed Anya's meager earnings as a freelance art restorer. Anya was good, exceptional even, with an artist's eye for detail and a surgeon's delicate touch. She could coax forgotten colors back to life, mend shattered ceramic with invisible seams, restore the soul to a damaged canvas. But talent, she had learned, rarely paid for experimental treatments or specialized care. Every morning, the first thought that pierced through the hazy veil of sleep was Lena. Every night, the last image before exhaustion claimed her was Lena's pale, beloved face. The guilt was a heavy cloak, woven with every skipped meal, every faded dress, every luxury she denied herself, knowing it was never enough. Anya often found herself staring at the intricate patterns on a particularly challenging piece, her hands meticulously working, while her mind was miles away, trapped in the sterile corridors of the hospital, listening to the rhythmic beeping of Lena's machines. The sound was a constant, low-frequency hum in her subconscious, a grim soundtrack to her crumbling existence. Tonight, however, the abyss felt closer, more tangible. It wasn't just the gnawing anxiety for Lena's health. It was the chilling, metallic taste of an obligation she couldn't escape. The obsidian hand. The name itself felt like a curse, a whisper of shadows and unseen power. They had found her when she was most vulnerable, a predatory kindness masked in polished leather and cold smiles. Alone, they had called it. A lifeline for Lena, when every other door had slammed shut in Anya's face. Now the repayment was due, and it wasn't in money. It was in her integrity. The memory of their visit still made her stomach clench. Two men, built like stone statues, had appeared at her door, their presence a palpable weight in her small, dust-filled studio. Their suits, impeccably tailored, smelled of expensive cologne and something else, something dangerous like freshly polished steel. The leader, a man with eyes like chips of granite, had merely smiled, a thin, humorless curve of his lips. "Ms. Petrova," he had said, his voice a low purr that held the unmistakable threat of a coiled viper. "Your sister's treatment is progressing. We trust our arrangement is working out." Anya's breath had hitched. She knew then. The hammer blow was coming. "What do you want?" Her voice, usually soft, had been a desperate rasp. He had produced a photograph, not of Lena, but of a painting. A stunning Renaissance portrait, vibrant with a faux patina of age. "Tonight, at the Belvedere auction, you will authenticate this piece as genuine." Her world had spun. "It's a forgery," she'd whispered, her artistic soul recoiling. "A masterful one, but a forgery nonetheless." The brushwork was nearly flawless, the pigments expertly aged, but there was a subtle dissonance, a faint hum of inauthenticity only a truly trained eye would catch. The man's smile had widened, a terrifying thing to behold. "Indeed. But tonight it will be genuine. Your word, Miss Petrova, is all that matters. And if your word wavers, your sister's condition, regrettably, may too." The implication hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. A cold, insidious terror had seized Anya, squeezing the air from her lungs. She could almost taste the metallic tang of fear on her tongue. Her hands, usually steady as she worked to breathe life back into decaying masterpieces, had been shaking violently. She had pleaded, argued, even cried. But their resolve was a concrete wall. Lena's innocent face, so trusting, so dependent, had flashed before her eyes, eclipsing her artistic ethics, her personal pride, everything. She had no choice. Now, as twilight bled into a bruised, inky night, Anya stood before her cracked mirror, a vision of unwilling compliance. Her best dress, a simple black shift, hung loosely on her frame, emphasizing her gauntness. She smoothed down a stray strand of dark hair, tied back severely, revealing the hollows beneath her cheekbones. Her eyes, usually alive with a passion for art, were shadowed with dread. The reflection staring back was not the Anya Petrova who believed in truth and beauty, but a ghost, a pawn. The weight of the impending lie felt like a physical burden, pressing down on her shoulders, threatening to buckle her knees. She imagined the discerning eyes of the other collectors, the connoisseurs, the whispers that would follow if even a hint of her deception were to surface. But what was her reputation? What was integrity against Lena's fragile life? The question twisted in her gut, a sickening knot. A car horn blared impatiently from the street below, a sharp, jarring sound that cut through the oppressive silence of her apartment. It was them, the Obsidian Hand, their cold luxury, awaiting her descent into a hell of her own making. The air, already thin, seemed to thicken with the scent of fear, clinging to her skin. She grabbed her worn handbag, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. Every nerve ending screamed at her to run, to disappear, but Lena's face, etched into her very soul, held her captive. She took a shuddering breath, tasting the desperation. With one last, aching glance at the framed photo of a smiling Lena on her bedside table, Anya stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. The cold, unforgiving Chicago night swallowed her whole, pulling her towards the clandestine auction house, towards the forging of a lie, and unknowingly, towards the unblinking gaze of a man who collected not just art, but destinies. She could feel the intricate web of deceit tightening around her, each strand humming with dangerous anticipation. She just didn't know yet whose web it truly was. The black sedan, a silent, predatory beast, glided through the rain-slicked streets of downtown Chicago. Each drop of water streaking across the tinted window felt like a tear, blurring the city lights into melancholic smudges. Anya sat rigid in the back seat, the scent of expensive leather and something subtly metallic, perhaps the faint, lingering aroma of the men who drove it, filling her nostrils. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white, tiny mountains of bone beneath pale skin. Every beat of her heart was a panicked bird trapped within her ribs, frantically trying to escape. "We are here, Ms. Petrova." The voice of the driver, a low rumble, broke the suffocating silence. Anya looked up, her gaze tracing the outline of the building outside. It was a nondescript brownstone, tucked away on a quiet side street, its facade devoid of any overt signage. Only the single ornate gas lamp by the heavy oak door hinted at the opulence hidden within. No flashing neon, no grand entrance, merely a subtle invitation to a world concealed from ordinary sight. An underground auction. A fitting stage for her impending betrayal. As the car pulled to a silent stop, one of the granite-faced men from the Obsidian Hand opened her door. The chill night air, damp and biting, wrapped around her, making her shiver despite herself. She stepped onto the pavement, her borrowed heels clicking faintly, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the hushed environment. The heavy oak door swung inward, revealing a dimly lit foyer. The air within was thick with the scent of old wood, beeswax polish, and a faint, sweet aroma she couldn't quite place, perhaps lilies, or the subtle perfume of countless wealthy patrons. She was led through a labyrinth of hushed hallways, each adorned with dimly lit tapestries and enigmatic sculptures. The muffled murmurs of unseen conversations drifted from behind closed doors, hinting at secrets and deals made in the shadows. Anya felt utterly alien, a sparrow inadvertently caught in a den of lions. Her simple black dress, a stark contrast to the whispered opulence around her, felt like a uniform marking her as an outsider. Finally, they reached the main auction room. It was not the cavernous hall she had imagined, but an intimate, exquisitely appointed space. Velvet drapes in a deep sapphire blue adorned tall windows, obscuring the world outside. Crystal chandeliers, not garish but tastefully understated, cast a warm, golden glow on the faces of the assembled elite, men and women in impeccably tailored suits and glittering jewels, their expressions a mixture of casual superiority and sharp-eyed appraisal. The air hummed with a tension that was almost palpable, an anticipation that had nothing to do with art and everything to do with power. Anya was directed to a small, elevated platform at the front, next to a velvet-draped easel. The auctioneer, a slender man with a silver tongue and eyes that missed nothing, gave her a brief, unsettling smile. She could feel the stares of the room, 100 invisible needles pricking at her skin. Her stomach churned. This was it. The moment she would shatter her own integrity for Lena. The auction proceeded with a rhythmic grace, priceless artifacts, and exquisite sculptures changing hands with a casual flick of a wrist. Anya's mind, however, was a frantic whirlwind, her palms clammy. She focused on steadying her breathing, on pushing Lena's frail image to the forefront of her thoughts, a shield against her burgeoning shame. Then the auctioneer's voice shifted, a subtle deepening of tone that signaled the arrival of the main event. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our piece de resistance tonight. A recently discovered masterpiece, believed to be the lost serpent's kiss by the enigmatic Renaissance master Vittor Carpaccio. A gasp rippled through the room. A single spotlight intensified, shining on the velvet-draped easel beside Anya. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This was it. With a flourish, the drape was pulled back. The painting was magnificent. A portrait of a woman, her face a study in ethereal beauty, a tiny serpent coiled around her wrist, its emerald eyes glinting. The colors were rich, deep, the brushwork fluid and confident. From a distance, it was breathtaking. A true Carpaccio. Anya, the professional, felt a reluctant admiration for the forger's skill. It was almost perfect. Almost. The auctioneer began his eloquent discourse on the painting's history and provenance, his voice a smooth baritone. He then gestured towards Anya. And to formally attest to its unparalleled authenticity, we have with us tonight the esteemed Ms. Anya Petrova, renowned for her impeccable eye and meticulous expertise in Renaissance art. Anya stepped forward, the spotlight suddenly blinding. Her throat was dry, her mouth a desert. She could feel the weight of expectation, the pressure from the obsidian hands enforcers, who now stood strategically placed near the exits, their gazes like cold steel. She forced herself to look at the painting, to begin the lie. Her eyes, however, instinctively gravitated towards a specific detail. The subtle shimmer of light on the serpent's scales. The forger had been brilliant, replicating Carpaccio's unique luminous technique almost flawlessly. But there, just beneath the serpent's left eye, was a whisper of a brushstroke, a barely perceptible tremor in the line work. It was too precise, too modern. Carpaccio, for all his genius, would have had a fraction more organic imperfection, a subtle humanity in his strokes. It was the whisper of a tell, a signature of falsity only she, with her intimate knowledge of the master's hand, would ever detect. Her breath hitched. The lie, which had felt like a necessary evil moments ago, now tasted like ash. Her entire body screamed in protest. Her moral compass, though battered and bruised, began to spin wildly. How could she desecrate the memory of true art, of truth itself, for these men? But then, Lena's face, pale and fragile, flashed behind her eyelids. Lena. The word was a desperate prayer, a silent plea for forgiveness. As she opened her mouth to speak the lie, her gaze swept across the room, seeking some anchor, some point of focus. And then she saw him. Julian Volkov. He had entered the room without a whisper of sound, without fanfare, yet his presence was a seismic shift. He sat in the front row, a figure of stark, dangerous elegance. His suit, charcoal gray, was tailored to perfection, emphasizing the lean, powerful lines of his body. His dark hair was swept back from a severe, angular face, framing eyes that were the color of obsidian, deep and devoid of warmth, yet intensely, unnervingly perceptive. He was utterly still, exuding an aura of controlled power that silenced the very air around him. He wasn't merely observing, he was owning the space. Anya had heard the whispers, the hushed legend surrounding Julian Volkov, the collector, a man whose passion for rare artifacts was matched only by his ruthless control of Chicago's underworld. A Mafia boss. She felt an involuntary shiver run down her spine, a primal instinct recognizing a predator. His gaze, dark and unblinking, was fixed on her. Not the painting, but her. It felt like a physical touch, a cold tendril of inspection winding around her, seeing through her desperate facade, dissecting her fear, her internal battle. There was no pity, no judgment, only a clinical, almost predatory assessment. In those dark depths, Anya felt a strange, unsettling blend of profound fear and an inexplicable sense of being utterly exposed, yet intensely seen. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was a strained whisper, barely audible above the hushed anticipation. The brushwork, it's... She faltered, her resolve wavering. The words masterpiece and genuine died on her tongue. Her eyes, wide and terrified, met Julian's again. A flicker, almost imperceptible, passed through his obsidian gaze. He saw her hesitation. He understood her struggle. A beat of excruciating silence stretched, heavy and taut, across the room. The auctioneer cleared his throat, a sharp, impatient sound. The enforcers of the obsidian hand shifted, their subtle movements radiating menace. Anya's mind screamed for her to just speak, to say the words, to save Lena. Then Julian Volkov moved. A single, decisive gesture. His hand, long-fingered and strong, rose languidly, holding a small, polished paddle. 200 million, his voice a low, resonant rumble, cut through the tension like a blade. It wasn't a question, nor was it a suggestion. It was a declaration. An absolute, non-negotiable claim. The room erupted in a collective gasp. 200 million. For a painting whose authenticity hung by a thread, questioned by the very expert brought to certify it. The auctioneer's jaw dropped. The faces of the obsidian hand enforcers contorted in disbelief, then cold fury. Julian, however, remained impassive. His gaze never left Anya's face. In that single breathtaking moment, he didn't just buy the painting. He bought the entire scene, the dilemma, and implicitly, Anya's precarious existence. He had snatched control from everyone. With a display of wealth so obscene, so effortless, it was terrifying. His eyes, dark as midnight, now held a new chilling intensity. They promised protection, possession, and a destiny Anya hadn't dared to imagine. Her breath caught, trapped in her throat. She felt an overwhelming sense of awe and a fresh, deeper fear. His gaze was a lock, and she, Anya Petrova, was suddenly and irrevocably claimed. Her entire future, as fragile and uncertain as it was, now belonged to the man known only as the Collector. What did he want with her? The question screamed in her silent mind, a terrifying cliffhanger to her very soul. The auction room was a cacophony of hushed whispers and indignant murmurs, a sharp contrast to the suffocating silence Julian Volkov had commanded moments before. Anya stood rooted to the spot, the spotlight still a cruel, unforgiving circle around her. 200 million. The number echoed in her ears, a bizarre, unbelievable sum for a painting she knew, with every fiber of her being, was a meticulously crafted lie. And Julian had bought it. Along with, she realized with a fresh wave of dread her. Before she could process the implications, a hulking figure in a dark suit materialized beside her. It was Victor, one of the Obsidian Hand's enforcers, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. His breath, heavy with stale cigarettes and something acrid, brushed her ear. "You almost blew it, Anya," he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl meant for her ears alone. "Our client paid a fortune to ensure no complications. And you stood there like a deer in headlights." Anya's stomach churned. The scent of danger emanating from him was palpable, making her skin crawl. I just needed a moment," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "A moment you didn't have." Another voice equally menacing cut in from behind. It was Roman, Victor's equally intimidating partner. "You think you can jeopardize the hand and walk away?" Lena might find herself feeling a sudden chill in her hospital room. The casual cruelty of the threat ripped through Anya, colder than any Chicago wind. Lena. Her heart constricted, a physical ache. They always came back to Lena. The world tilted on its axis. All her moral revulsion, her artistic integrity, crumbled under the weight of that single, devastating name. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back the burning tears. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" Julian Volkov's voice, a low, melodic baritone, cut through the tense exchange. It wasn't loud, but possessed an undeniable authority that silenced even Victor and Roman. Anya's eyes snapped open. Julian was standing just a few feet away, having moved with an unnerving stealth. His obsidian gaze, sharp and analytical, swept over the enforcers, then settled on Anya's pale, trembling face. There was no warmth, no sympathy, only a detached, piercing curiosity that made her feel utterly transparent. Victor, despite his intimidating stature, seemed to shrink slightly under Julian's scrutiny. "No problem, Mr. Volkov. Just a misunderstanding with the expert. It's handled." His tone was noticeably less aggressive, edged with a forced deference. Julian merely raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. Indeed? Because it seemed Ms. Petrova was rather distressed. And anything pertaining to my new acquisition is very much my concern. His gaze flickered to Anya, a possessive glint in its depth that sent a shiver, both fearful and strangely electrifying, down her spine. The phrase, my new acquisition, resonated, a chilling echo of her deepest fears. He hadn't just bought a painting, he had bought her problem, and by extension her. Victor and Roman exchanged uneasy glances. They understood the unspoken hierarchy. Julian Volkov was in a different league, a predator far more dangerous than they were. Of course, Mr. Volkov, Victor mumbled, his eyes shifting uneasily. Our apologies. Julian didn't acknowledge their retreat. His attention was solely on Anya. He took a slow, deliberate step towards her, and another. The subtle scent of his expensive cologne, a rich woody aroma with a hint of something metallic, like polished brass, enveloped her. It was intoxicating, intimidating. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a silent force. Ms. Petrova, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that seemed to exclude the entire buzzing room. I believe we have business to discuss. My car is waiting. It wasn't a question. It was a command, delivered with such absolute certainty that resistance felt futile, even laughable. Anya's mind raced. To go with him meant stepping further into his dangerous, unknown world. To refuse meant facing the Obsidian Hand's wrath, a wrath that would undoubtedly fall on Lena. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. I need to go to the hospital, she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. My sister. Julian's eyes narrowed fractionally. Your sister's well-being is of paramount importance. I assure you, she will be safe. Safer than if you attempt to navigate the streets of Chicago tonight alone, or under the dubious protection of your other associates. He glanced briefly towards where Victor and Roman were now melting into the crowd, their furious glares still visible across the room. The implied threat was clear. The Obsidian Hand would come for her, and he knew it. Anya felt a desperate, agonizing pull in two directions. Fear for Lena tugged her heart, while fear of Julian, of his immense power and chilling possessiveness, clenched her gut. But the promise of safety for Lena, however veiled, was a siren song she couldn't ignore. Trap. That was the only word that came to mind. Trapped in a gilded cage, traded from one menacing hand to another. All right, she choked out, the word feeling like a surrender. I'll come with you. A flicker, almost imperceptible, of something akin to satisfaction crossed Julian's stoic features. He didn't smile, but a subtle shift in his aura suggested a victory claimed. He merely turned, his broad back a wall of dark fabric, and gestured for her to follow. Anya moved, her legs feeling like lead, the eyes of the auction room burning into her back. She felt like a display piece, a new acquisition being escorted by its formidable owner. The same black sedan waited outside, the rain still falling, blurring the world into streaks of gray. Julian opened the passenger door for her, a gesture of unexpected, almost archaic chivalry that felt jarringly out of place. The rich leather interior smelled cleaner now, less metallic, simply of luxury and power. She slid in, the softness of the seat a strange comfort against her rigid frame. Julian settled into the driver's seat, his movements precise, economical. He started the engine, a low, powerful hum, and the car glided away from the curb, leaving the clandestine auction house and the threats of the Obsidian Hand behind. Temporarily, at least. The journey to his estate was silent, save for the rhythmic swish of the wipers. Anya dared not speak. She stole glances at Julian's profile. His jaw was set, his eyes focused on the road, reflecting the blurred city lights. He was an enigma, a dangerous force. What was his game? Why was he so interested in her, a struggling art restorer caught in a web of debt and deceit? The question felt like a heavy stone in her chest. They drove for what felt like an eternity, leaving the city's harsh glow behind and venturing into an older, more secluded district. The houses grew larger, set back from the road behind towering gates and ancient trees. Finally, the car turned into a long, winding driveway. Massive wrought iron gates, adorned with an intricate, almost menacing crest, swung open silently, revealing a sprawling estate bathed in the soft, yellow glow of distant lanterns. The mansion itself was a fortress, ancient stone gleaming faintly under the rain, ivy clinging to its walls like a dark embrace. It was formidable, beautiful, and utterly overwhelming. A golden cage. The thought struck Anya with startling clarity. Julian parked the car in a cavernous garage that smelled faintly of expensive gasoline and polished chrome. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was profound, broken only by the distant patter of rain. "Welcome, Miss Petrova," he said, his voice a low rumble in the confines of the car. "To my home. And my collection." He exited the car, and Anya followed, stepping onto polished concrete. The air in the garage was cool, still carrying the faint, intoxicating scent of his cologne. He led her into the mansion, through a heavy oak door that opened into a grand foyer. Her eyes widened. The interior was a symphony of dark wood, rich tapestries, and gleaming marble. Sculptures, ancient and modern, stood sentinel in alcoves, bathed in soft, strategic lighting. The air was warm, smelling of old paper, leather, and something undefinable, perhaps the very essence of wealth and history. Julian turned to face her, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, his posture radiating an intimidating authority. "You are here to appraise my personal collection, Miss Petrova, to ensure every piece is precisely what it claims to be. Your expertise is invaluable. Your loyalty, however, is paramount." His eyes held hers, a silent challenge. "Loyalty?" Anya swallowed, her throat dry. "To you?" "To me," he confirmed, his voice unwavering. "While you are under my roof, you will adhere to my rules. You will not leave this property without my express permission. You will not communicate with anyone I have not approved. And you will not, under any circumstances, attempt to deceive me again. Do we understand each other?" His words were firm, uncompromising. A palpable wave of resignation washed over Anya. She was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She was his prisoner, albeit one housed in opulent comfort. Yet, beneath the fear, a tiny, defiant spark ignited. He hadn't killed her. He hadn't handed her back to the Obsidian Hand. He had, in his own terrifying way, offered her a sanctuary. A temporary one, perhaps, but a sanctuary nonetheless. A sliver of cautious hope, fragile as spun glass, nestled itself in her weary heart. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We understand each other, Mr. Volkov." Julian's lips curved, a subtle, almost imperceptible twitch that might have been a ghost of a smile. "Good. Now you must be exhausted. My housekeeper, Mrs. Rossi, will show you to your room. Tomorrow, Miss Petrova, your work begins. And your life, as you know it, ends. Welcome to your new reality." The last words hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement that sealed her fate, leaving her with a dizzying mix of fear, a strange sense of surrender, and a desperate curiosity about this new, dangerous reality. The guest room, sprawling and opulent, was a stark contrast to Anya's meager apartment. She awoke to the muted glow of dawn filtering through heavy velvet drapes, thick as fortress walls against the outside world. The mattress beneath her was a cloud of silk and feathers, molding to her body with an almost indecent softness. She stretched, her muscles protesting the unaccustomed luxury. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old money, a clean, hushed scent that spoke of diligent care and an untouchable quiet. For a moment, a fleeting, dangerous moment, Anya allowed herself to pretend. To imagine this was simply a dream, a respite from the crushing weight of Lena's illness, from the suffocating grip of the Obsidian Hand. But then reality, cold and sharp, sliced through the illusion. She was in Julian Volkov's house, a prisoner in a golden cage. She rose, her feet sinking into the plush Persian rug. Her eyes scanned the room, a pristine antique dresser, a chaise lounge upholstered in rich brocade, a massive four-poster bed draped in fine linen. On a small, inlaid table sat a silver tray with a delicate teapot and a single, perfectly blooming white orchid. It was an offering, a silent gesture of luxury, but it felt more like an elaborate trap. She was being cared for, yes, but also contained, observed. After a quick, lukewarm shower in the marble-clad bathroom, she dressed in the same black dress, feeling its worn fabric cling to her. She glanced at herself in the ornate mirror, her reflection a pale, almost ethereal figure against the backdrop of lavishness. She was Anya Petrova, art restorer, now Julian Volkov's newest possession. Breakfast was served in a sun-drenched conservatory that overlooked a sprawling, manicured garden. Mrs. Rossi, a plump, kindly-faced woman with quick, efficient movements, brought her plate of fresh fruit, warm pastries, and coffee so rich it smelled like dark earth. Mr. Volkov will join you shortly, miss, Mrs. Rossi said, her voice soft and deferential. He prefers to take his coffee in the gallery on most mornings, but we'll see you here first today. Anya merely nodded, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. The food, though delicious, tasted like sawdust in her mouth. She felt exposed, vulnerable, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Julian entered moments later, and the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a dark, impeccably tailored cashmere sweater that somehow made him appear even more formidable, less like a businessman and more like a predator in repose. The fabric stretched taut across his broad shoulders, hinting at the coiled power beneath. His obsidian eyes, as sharp and intelligent as she remembered, swept over her, a quick, thorough assessment that missed nothing. The clean, woody scent of his cologne, less aggressive in the daylight, still filled the space, wrapping around her. Ms. Petrova, he greeted, his voice a low rumble. He didn't smile. I trust your accommodations are satisfactory? They are more than satisfactory, Mr. Volkov, Anya replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Thank you. He took the seat opposite her, a small, intricate porcelain cup appearing in his hand as if by magic. Good. Then we can proceed. Your task, as I explained, is to authenticate my collection. Every piece. Starting with the West Wing. He took a slow sip of coffee, his gaze never leaving her. I expect absolute honesty. And discretion. Anya met his gaze, a spark of defiance igniting within her. I've always prided myself on my honesty, Mr. Volkov. It was circumstances that forced my hand last night. A ghost of a smirk, quick and chilling, touched his lips. Circumstances, Miss Petrova, are often a test of character. You wavered. But ultimately, you did not speak the lie. That, at least, I appreciate. The words, though seemingly a compliment, were delivered with a cold precision that stripped them of any warmth. He saw her, truly saw her, even the internal battle she had fought. It was unnerving. The days that followed fell into a strange, unsettling rhythm. Anya spent her mornings in Julian's vast, silent art galleries, meticulously examining painting after painting, sculpture after sculpture. The collection was breathtaking, a testament to centuries of human creativity and Julian's formidable wealth. She worked with an almost frantic energy, losing herself in the intricate details, the vibrant histories, the silent stories embedded in each piece. It was a balm to her troubled soul, a temporary escape. Julian often appeared, materializing silently, leaning against a doorframe or standing just out of her immediate periphery, observing her. At first, his presence was a constant source of anxiety, making her acutely aware of his power, his control. But gradually, a curious transformation began. He would sometimes speak, his voice low, offering a comment on a particular piece. The light in this early Rembrandt, he once mused, tracing the curve of a painted cheekbone with an almost tender reverence. It speaks of a sorrow that is almost divine. Do you not agree, Ms. Petrova? Anya, startled by his proximity, would find herself drawn into a genuine discussion about art. And to her astonishment, Julian's knowledge was profound, not merely superficial appreciation, but a deep, almost academic understanding of technique, history, and the very soul of the artist. He could articulate the nuanced difference between two Renaissance workshops, or identify the subtle shift in an artist's style across decades. It was a startling contrast to the cold, calculating Mafia boss she knew him to be, a crack in his formidable facade. You understand art deeply, Mr. Volkov, she once ventured, surprised by her own boldness. He merely regarded her with that intense, unblinking gaze. Beauty is power, Ms. Petrova, and I collect power. One must understand it to wield it effectively. The answer was unsettling, yet it held an undeniable truth. He wasn't simply a collector. He was a connoisseur of influence, and art was another facet of that dominion. Anya also began to observe his interactions with his staff. Mrs. Rossi, despite her initial deference, spoke to Julian with a comfortable, almost maternal ease. The security guards, hulking men with watchful eyes, treated him with a loyalty that went beyond mere employment. They showed respect, not just fear. It complicated her understanding of him. He was a ruthless mafia boss, yet in his own twisted way, he commanded an almost feudal devotion. Then came the unexpected, subtle warmth. One afternoon, while Anya was meticulously cleaning a delicate porcelain figurine, her phone, which Julian had allowed her to keep for emergencies, buzzed with a message from Lena's hospital. Expecting the usual bleak updates, Anya's heart seized with terror. Instead, the message from a new, unfamiliar doctor stated, Lena Petrova's condition has stabilized remarkably. She has been approved for a groundbreaking new treatment, and her private room and full-time nursing care have been secured. All expenses covered by an anonymous benefactor. Rest assured, she is in the best hands. Anya reread the message, her mind reeling. Anonymous benefactor. Private room. All expenses covered. It was too coincidental. Too perfectly timed. Her eyes, filled with a sudden, overwhelming rush of emotion, darted towards Julian, who was standing across the gallery, seemingly engrossed in a Rothko painting. He didn't look at her, yet she felt his awareness, a subtle shift in the air. He had done this. He was behind this. A tidal wave of gratitude, so fierce it almost buckled her knees, crashed over her. He had taken Lena's crushing burden from her shoulders. He hadn't explicitly promised it, but he had acted. The fear of him remained, a constant low hum, but now a tentative trust, fragile as a spiderweb, began to weave itself around her heart. He was dangerous, possessive, a captor in all but name, yet he had saved Lena. He was a monster, but he was her monster. That night, as she lay in the luxurious bed, the silence of the mansion pressing in, Anya's thoughts were a tangled mess. Curiosity about Julian, about the enigma of his soul, war with her instinct for self-preservation. Her body, despite itself, remembered the heat of his presence, the unnerving intensity of his gaze. She should hate him. She should. But a burgeoning attraction, a dangerous, forbidden pull, was stirring within her, insidious and undeniable. He had bought her, claimed her, imprisoned her. But in doing so, he had also, unknowingly, saved the one person who truly mattered to her. And the thought ignited a complex, terrifying warmth in her chest, a heat that promised both salvation and utter damnation. What else was he capable of, this man who wielded power like a god and saw art with the soul of a poet, yet was undeniably a monster? And what would he demand in return for this ultimate gift? The answers, she knew, would either free her or bind her forever. The days in Julian Volkov's mansion blurred into a strange tapestry of meticulous restoration and suffocating observation. Anya spent her mornings immersed in the hushed, cavernous galleries, her hands coaxing life back into fading canvases or painstakingly mending fractured statuettes. The sheer volume and quality of Julian's collection were staggering, each piece a testament to centuries of artistry, and she couldn't help but acknowledge, to the owner's profound, if perhaps brutal influence. Her work was her only solace, the methodical precision a shield against the burgeoning complexities of her new reality. She meticulously cleaned the delicate filigree of a Byzantine icon, her magnifying glass revealing hidden details, while her mind replayed Julian's words, his actions. He was a paradox wrapped in bespoke suits and dangerous intent. He spoke of art with genuine reverence, possessed a connoisseur's eye, and had, undeniably, ensured Lena's safety. Yet the undercurrent of his power, the silent, watchful presence of his men, was a constant reminder of the golden cage she inhabited. She felt the subtle shift in the air whenever he entered a room, the heightened alertness of his guards, the way her own pulse quickened. He was always there, a shadow in her periphery, a pressure in her thoughts. One crisp Tuesday afternoon, Julian surprised her. Anya was deep in concentration, restoring the faded pigments of a minor Flemish portrait in her sunlit studio, a spacious, perfectly equipped room Julian had assigned her. The scent of linseed oil and turpentine was a familiar comfort. Ms. Petrova, his voice, low and resonant, made her jump. He was standing in the doorway, framed by the ornate arch, his hands in the pockets of his dark trousers. The casual posture did nothing to diminish his formidable aura. Mr. Volkov, Anya replied, her heart still thrumming from the suddenness of his appearance. She quickly lowered her brush. You have been confined indoors for some time, he stated, his obsidian eyes sweeping over her, an unreadable intensity in their depths. The fresh air would do you good. I have arranged for you to visit the conservatory. Mrs. Rossi will accompany you, along with 2 of my men. A change of scenery. A walk among the orchids. You may even find inspiration. Anya stared at him, stunned. Breath of fresh air. The thought was almost intoxicating. She hadn't realized how much she craved the simple act of stepping outside, beyond the controlled grandeur of the mansion. The conservatory? She repeated, a cautious hope fluttering in her chest. Indeed. His gaze narrowed slightly. But you understand the rules, Miss Petrova. No deviation from the planned route. No unauthorized contact. Every precaution has been taken. Of course, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The familiar prickle of fear mingled with a desperate longing for even this small, guarded freedom. Thank you, Mr. Volkov. Anya dressed in a simple wool coat, feeling a strange lightness in her step as she followed Mrs. Rossi and two silent, broad-shouldered men, Victor, the same enforcer who had threatened her after the auction, and a new, equally stoic guard named Mikhail out to a waiting black SUV. The sky was a brilliant, pale blue, stretched taut over the city, and the air, though cool, felt invigorating. It was the first time she'd been off the estate since that fateful auction night. The Botanical Conservatory was a glass-domed oasis nestled amidst the city's concrete expanse. Inside, the air was warm and humid, thick with intoxicating scent of exotic blooms and damp earth. Lush ferns cascaded from hanging baskets, brilliant orchids exploded in a riot of color, and tiny, crystalline waterfalls trickled into koi ponds. For a brief, precious moment, Anya allowed herself to breathe, to simply be. She walked slowly, absorbing the vibrant greens and startling purples, the intricate patterns of the leaves, the delicate fragility of the petals. Mrs. Rossi chattered softly about her own garden, a comforting, mundane sound. Victor and Mikhail remained at a respectful distance, their dark suits a jarring contrast to the verdant surroundings, but their presence was a constant, subtle hum of vigilance. As Anya rounded a bend in a path lined with giant bamboo, she felt a sudden prickling sensation at the back of her neck. A wrongness, a shift in the air, a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her eyes scanned a path ahead, then darted to a small, secluded bench nestled among a thicket of tropical plants. A man sat there, seemingly engrossed in a newspaper. But something about him. He was too still, too neatly dressed for a casual visitor to a conservatory. As Anya's gaze landed on him, he slowly lowered the newspaper, revealing a face that sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. It wasn't Victor or Roman, but she recognized the cold, calculating eyes, the thin scar above his left eyebrow. He was one of them. A lower-ranking member of the Obsidian Hand, a messenger, a scout. His lips stretched into a slow, unsettling smile that didn't reach his eyes. He lifted his hand casually, almost imperceptibly, making a small, circular gesture with his index finger, the symbol of the Obsidian Hand. Then his gaze flickered pointedly, chillingly, towards a small, inconspicuous flower pot near Anya's feet. A single wilted lily, starkly out of place among the vibrant orchids. A direct, undeniable message about Lena. Anya's breath hitched. Panic, cold and raw, clawed at her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She felt dizzy, the humid air suddenly suffocating. Her carefully constructed facade of calm shattered. She wanted to scream, to run, but her feet felt bolted to the ground. The Obsidian Hand had found her. They knew where she was, and they were still threatening Lena. Before she could even form a coherent thought, Victor and Mikhail were already moving. They hadn't looked at the man, hadn't acknowledged the lily, but their bodies had subtly shifted, becoming more coiled, more alert. They were closer now, forming a protective, though unspoken, barrier around her. Then a voice calm and lethal sliced through the humid air. A pleasant afternoon for a stroll, isn't it, Mr. Volkov? Anya spun around. Julian. He stood not 20 feet away, having emerged from behind a towering palm, his presence as sudden and commanding as ever. He wasn't alone. Another of his men, a silent, gray-haired giant Anya hadn't seen before, stood a respectful pace behind him. Julian's eyes, like chips of polished obsidian, were fixed not on Anya, but on a man on the bench. There was no anger on his face, only a chilling, utterly devoid of emotion, intensity. The man on the bench, his forced smile faltering, slowly rose. Mr. Volkov, I was just admiring the flora. His voice was a nervous croak. Julian took a slow, deliberate step forward. Indeed. But your admiration, it seems, has strayed from its intended target. You chose to leave a message, did you not? A rather personal one, I believe. His gaze flickered, for the barest fraction of a second, to the wilted lily, then back to the man. The implication was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The man's bravado completely dissolved. His face went pale, a sheen of sweat appearing on his forehead despite the cool air. No, sir. Just a coincidence. I assure you, Silence, Julian commanded, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it resonated with an absolute authority that brooked no argument. You misunderstand your position. You do not address me unless spoken to. You do not trespass on my property. And you absolutely do not attempt to send messages to what belongs to me. The possessive pronoun, what belongs to me, hit Anya with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just talking about the painting, he was talking about her. And Lena. Before the man could utter another sound, Julian merely gave a fractional nod to his gray-haired guard. It was almost imperceptible, a silent command in a language only they understood. The guard moved with astonishing speed. One moment, the Obsidian hand member was standing, trembling. The next, he was on the ground, a muffled grunt escaping his lips as the giant's hand clamped over his mouth, pulling him into the dense foliage. There was a brief, guttural sound, a scuffle hidden by the thick leaves, then silence. Absolute, chilling silence. It was swift, brutal, and utterly final. Anya didn't see the exact moment, but she knew. The man was gone. Dispatched. Anya gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror, fixed on the spot where the man had vanished. She could still smell the sweet scent of the orchids, but now it was tainted with the acrid tang of fear and something darker, more primal. Julian had done it. He had eliminated a threat, a messenger, with an almost casual flick of his wrist. Julian turned, his gaze meeting Anya's. There was no apology, no explanation, only that intense, unblinking assessment. A small misunderstanding, Miss Petrova, he said, his voice as calm and steady as if he were discussing art history. Dealt with. My property remains untouchable. My rules, as I explained, are absolute. Anya felt a renewed wave of fear, a dizzying nausea at the brutal efficiency of his world. He was a monster, a man capable of such cold-blooded violence. Yet, as she stood there, trembling, a strange, perverse sense of security began to settle over her. She was terrified of him, yes, but she was no longer terrified for Lena's star. He had protected them. He had removed the threat. The obsidian hand had shown its face, and Julian had crushed it with terrifying ease. He had promised safety, and in his own terrifying, absolute way, he had delivered. It was a dark, possessive kind of protection, a golden cage with sharp, unforgiving bars. But inside that cage, Lena was safe. And for Anya, that was all that mattered. Julian stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, enveloping her. The faint scent of his cologne, mingled now with something faintly metallic, filled her senses. His hand, warm and firm, rested briefly on her elbow, a possessive, almost claiming gesture. Are you quite finished with your admiration of the flora, Miss Petrova? He asked, his voice low. I believe there are other pieces in my collection that require your expertise. Pieces that are far more deserving of your full attention. His eyes, dark as the deepest well, held hers, a silent, dangerous promise of absolute protection. And an even more absolute claim. Anya shivered, torn between horror and an undeniable, terrifying attraction to the powerful, dangerous man who had just shown her the true extent of his reach. The world outside might be dangerous, but inside his fortress, she was untouchable. For now. The incident at the conservatory, swift and brutal, had cemented Anya's understanding of Julian Volkov's world. Fear was still a constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now a complex, nuanced fear. It was the fear of a wild animal, terrifying in its power, yet paradoxically, a strange, fierce protector. The obsidian hand hadn't dared to show their faces again. Julian's message had been delivered with deadly precision. Lena was truly safe. For that, Anya felt a gratitude so profound it bordered on reverence. Her routine resumed, but something had shifted. The silence of the galleries no longer felt quite so oppressive. Julian's presence, though still formidable, didn't evoke the same sharp pang of terror. She found herself watching him more closely, observing the subtle nuances of his expressions, the way his dark eyes, so often cold and analytical, would linger on a particularly striking piece of art with an almost wistful intensity. He was a puzzle she hadn't realized she was desperate to solve. One evening, after dinner, a quiet, formal affair that usually left Anya feeling like a carefully arranged centerpiece, she found Julian in his private study. The room was a sanctuary of dark wood, worn leather, and the intoxicating scent of old books and expensive cigars. He was seated at a massive mahogany desk, a single lamp casting a golden pool of light on a stack of intricate ledgers. The soft glow softened the harsh lines of his face, making him appear, for a fleeting moment, less like a god of war and more like a man burdened by immense responsibility. Anya hesitated at the threshold, her hand resting on the cool smooth with the doorframe. "Mr. Volkov," she ventured, her voice a soft ripple in the stillness. He looked up, his obsidian eyes cutting through the dimness, instantly sharp. "Ms. Petrova, I thought you would have retired." I couldn't sleep," she admitted, stepping further into the room. The warmth emanating from the fireplace was a comforting embrace. "I wanted to thank you. For Lena. For everything." The words felt inadequate, hollow against the magnitude of his actions. Julian leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled, his gaze unreadable. "I protect what is mine, Ms. Petrova. Lena is intrinsically linked to you, and you now are under my protection. It is merely practical." Anya bristled slightly at the blunt assessment, but she knew it was his way. "It was more than practical, Mr. Volkov. It was a kindness. A profound kindness." She took a deep breath, pushing past her ingrained fear. "I know you operate in a world where kindness is a weakness, but I owe you more than I can ever repay." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers, dissecting her sincerity. Then a subtle shift. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a plush armchair opposite his desk. Anya sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the distant rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. She felt an urge, raw and undeniable, to unburden herself, to offer him something in return for the peace he had brought to her sister's precarious life. "I didn't mean to deceive you at the auction," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "It was a choice between my integrity and Lena's life. They threatened her. The obsidian hand. They said they would hurt her if I didn't authenticate that forgery." Her voice cracked on the last words, the memory of fresh wound. "I would have done anything. Anything to keep her safe." Julian listened, his expression unwavering, yet Anya felt an almost imperceptible softening in his aura. "I understood that," he said, his voice a low, steady balm. "You chose the lesser of two evils. A choice I'm often forced to make myself." His words, devoid of judgment, offered a strange sense of validation. She continued, pouring out the anguish of the past few years, Lena's diagnosis, the crushing medical bills, the endless nights of worry, the slow erosion of her own spirit. She spoke of her childhood dreams of restoring masterpieces, of the joy she found in bringing beauty back to life, now overshadowed by the constant, gnawing fear of loss. "I would burn every museum, every gallery, every beautiful thing if it meant Lena could live a full life," she whispered, tears finally escaping, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. "She is my everything." Julian rose from his desk, his movements fluid and silent. He walked to the window, his back to her, gazing out into the inky blackness. "I understand that kind of devotion," he said, his voice surprisingly raw, tinged with a bitterness Anya hadn't heard before. "The kind that makes you capable of anything. The kind that makes you a target." He turned, and in his eyes for the first time, Anya saw not just power, but a flicker of profound pain, a deep-seated wound. "My parents," he began, his voice low, almost a confession. "They were collectors. Not of art, but of influence. They built this empire, brick by the bloody brick. They had everything, except security. One night, when I was a boy, a rival organization decided to send a message. They killed them. Both of them. In this very house." Anya gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The sheer brutality of his past, the casual recounting of such a devastating loss, chilled her to the bone. "I was hidden," he continued, his gaze distant, lost in the shadows of memory. "I heard everything. The screams, the silence that followed. I vowed then that I would never be weak. Never again would I allow anything I cared for to be vulnerable, to be taken." His eyes, now returning to Anya, held a chilling intensity. "Control, Ms. Petrova, is not merely a preference for me. It is a necessity, a religion. The only way to ensure survival, to protect what matters." He paused, then added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "And when they left, when they took everything, I felt empty, a hollow shell. The art was just filler. The power a means to an end. Until now." His gaze held hers, an unspoken connection, a shared vulnerability. He was referring to her, to Lena, to the unexpected, unwelcome light she had brought into his meticulously guarded darkness. Anya felt a wave of empathy, so strong it physically ached. She saw past the formidable Mafia boss, past the cold veneer, to the wounded boy who had witnessed unthinkable horror. His need for control, for absolute dominion, suddenly made a chilling, terrifying sense. It was his armor, his fortress against an unforgiving world. And she, inadvertently, had become a part of his new, vulnerable interior. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken emotions. Shared pain, nascent understanding, a dangerous, undeniable current of attraction. Julian took another step towards her, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. The scent of him, the rich cologne, the faint metallic tang of danger, the subtle warmth of his skin, enveloped her, making her dizzy. He reached out, his long fingers gently cupping her jaw. His touch was both possessive and incredibly tender, sending a jolt of electricity through Anya's entire body. Her breath hitched. Her eyes, wide and luminous with unshed tears, met his. In their depths, she saw a flicker of raw desire, a longing that mirrored her own burgeoning, terrifying yearning. Anya, he murmured, his thumb stroking her cheekbone, a feather-light touch that promised so much more. The sound of her name, spoken in his deep, resonant voice, was like a caress, a claiming. It was the first time he had used it. You are not like the others. You see beneath. Her lips parted, a silent invitation. She felt an overwhelming urge to lean into his touch, to seek comfort, to surrender to the dangerous allure of this man who had revealed his scars, and in doing so, had opened up a hidden chasm within her. She was terrified, yes, but also undeniably drawn. The hunger in his eyes, dark and intense, was a reflection of the unspoken hunger that now thrummed beneath her own skin. His head lowered, slowly, inexorably. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the taut skin. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable, the forbidden. His breath, warm and tantalizing, ghosted over her lips. The anticipation was a potent, exquisite torture. Julian, she whispered, a plea, a warning, a surrender. His lips, firm and demanding, finally met hers. It was not a soft kiss, not a gentle exploration. It was a declaration, a branding. All the pent-up tension, the unspoken desires, the dangerous understanding that had been building between them, exploded in that single, searing contact. His mouth moved against hers with a primal hunger, claiming, possessing. Her fingers, trembling, instinctively reached up, clinging to his strong forearms, feeling the hard muscle beneath the cashmere. She kissed him back with a desperation born of fear, gratitude, and a terrifying, undeniable longing. It was a kiss of fire and ice, of danger and salvation. A perilous, exhilarating descent into his world, into him. When he finally pulled back, just inches, their breaths mingled, ragged and uneven. His forehead rested against hers, his eyes still closed, a tremor running through his powerful frame. Anya's knees felt weak, her entire body alight with a forbidden heat. She knew, with terrifying certainty, that this kiss had irrevocably changed everything. She was no longer just his captive. She was his body and soul, caught in a web of his making. And the more she learned of his darkness, the more she found herself drawn to it, irrevocably tangled. The scars he had unveiled were now etched onto her own heart, binding them together in a way she could never have foreseen. What would he demand next? And could she, or would she even resist? The fragile sense of peace Anya had cultivated within Julian's formidable walls shattered with the brutality of a hammer striking glass. The days following their kiss in the study had been a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The raw, searing passion of that moment had left her breathless, trembling, yet utterly alive. It had been a dangerous fire, igniting a hunger she hadn't known she possessed, a yearning for the man who was both her captor and her protector. She found herself stealing glances at him across the opulent dining table, her skin tingling, remembering the hard press of his lips, the possessive claim of his hands. Julian, in turn, had remained an enigma, his gaze intense, assessing, yet subtly softer when it fell upon her. The control he exerted was absolute, but the undercurrent of his burgeoning care for her, for Lena, was undeniable. Lena, remarkably, was thriving. The anonymous benefactor had truly provided the best care. Anya received daily updates from the new doctor, detailing Lena's improved prognosis, the efficacy of the new treatments. The updates were a lifeline, a constant reminder of the profound, terrifying debt she owed Julian. The thought of Lena's bright, innocent face was a shield against the darker aspects of Julian's world, a beacon that allowed Anya to navigate the complex, treacherous landscape of her feelings for him. It was a seemingly innocuous afternoon. The sky outside was a serene, cloudless blue, promising the gentle warmth of an early autumn day. Anya was in her studio, meticulously cleaning a delicate tapestry, the scent of lavender and old wool filling the air. She hummed a soft tune, a rare melody of contentment. Mrs. Rossi had just brought her a cup of chamomile tea, its warmth seeping into her chilled fingers. For the first time in years, Anya felt a flicker of something akin to genuine hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, a fragile future existed here with Julian, with Lena safe. The shrill, insistent ring of her emergency phone, a separate device Julian had provided solely for contact with the hospital, tore through the quiet like a banshee's shriek. Anya's heart leaped into her throat, a cold dread instantly extinguishing her fleeting peace. She fumbled for the device, her fingers suddenly clumsy. "Hello," she managed, her voice tight with apprehension. "Ms. Petrova? This is Nurse Elaine from St. Jude's." The nurse's voice was frantic, breathless. "It's Lena. She's gone. Someone took her." The words hit Anya with the force of a physical blow. The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the polished floor. "No," she whispered, the single syllable a raw, desperate prayer. "No, no, no." Her mind refused to process it. Lena, gone. The image of Lena's small, fragile hand in hers, of her bright, trusting eyes, flashed before her. The world spun. The scent of lavender suddenly turned sickly sweet, cloying, suffocating. "What is it, Anya?" Mrs. Rossi asked, her kindly face etched with concern as she bent to retrieve the phone. Anya couldn't speak. A scream, primal and wordless, tore through her, echoing off the high ceilings of the opulent studio. She sank to her knees, the soft rug doing nothing to cushion the brutal impact of the news. Tears, hot and stinging, streamed down her face, blurring her vision. Lena. Her fault. All her fault. Julian. She needed Julian. Her protector, her monster. Before she could even formulate the thought, the door to the studio burst open. Julian stood there, his face a mask of stone, his obsidian eyes burning with an icy fire. He must have heard her scream. Two of his ever-present guards were right behind him, their faces grim. What happened? His voice was a low growl, radiating danger. Mrs. Rossi, trembling, held out the phone. Lena. Lena's been taken, sir. Julian's gaze snapped to Anya, huddled on the floor, her body racked with sobs. He saw the raw, devastating terror, the self-blame etched on her face. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of what Anya perceived as fury, dark and intense, crossed his features, directed not at her, but at the audacity of the world to invade his sanctuary, to touch what he claimed. But it was quickly replaced by something deeper, something colder, a lethal, focused resolve. He was beside her in an instant, dropping to one knee. His strong hands gripped her shoulders, firm, grounding. Anya, look at me. His voice was sharp, cutting through her haze of despair. Who? The obsidian hand, she choked out, forcing herself to look into his eyes, seeing her own terror reflected there magnified. They knew where she was. They used her. It's my fault, Julian. My fault for bringing this darkness into her life. For accepting their help in the first place. The words were ripped from her, laden with guilt and bitter regret. She was the one who had made the deal, who had opened the door to these monsters. Julian's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching visibly. No, it is their fault. For touching what is mine. The possessiveness in his voice was absolute, terrifying, yet also offered a strange, brutal comfort. He was furious, not at her, but at the violation of his dominion. He pulled out his own phone, barking rapid, clipped orders into it in a language Anya didn't understand, his voice devoid of any emotion, yet vibrating with controlled power. Find her. Every man. Every resource. No stone unturned. And bring me the head of anyone who stands in your way. His eyes, as he spoke, were fixed on Anya, a silent promise. Minutes later, the mansion, usually a bastion of hushed tranquility, was a hive of frantic, controlled activity. Guards moved with a heightened urgency, their movements precise. Radios crackled with clipped commands. Anya sat numbly in the study, Julian's empty coffee cup still on his desk, the lingering scent of his cologne now mixed with the sharp tang of impending conflict. Julian returned, his expression grim. He held a small, crumpled note in his hand. They sent a message, delivered to the hospital a minute after Lena was taken. They want the painting. The forged Carpaccio. Authenticated by you. Delivered by me. Or Lena disappears forever. His voice was low, laced with a dangerous edge. No. Anya cried, scrambling to her feet. You can't. It's a trick. They'll take the painting and still hurt her. Or worse, they'll use it to expose you, to weaken you. It's a trap, Julian, for you. Panic made her voice shrill. My life isn't worth your empire. Your safety. Julian's obsidian eyes narrowed, pinning her in place. Your life, Anya, and Lena's are intrinsically tied to mine now. They crossed a line. They touched what I claimed. They will learn the consequences. He took a step towards her, his presence utterly dominating the room. And you will not sacrifice yourself or Lena on the altar of my empire. This is my problem to solve, not yours. But it is my fault. Anya insisted, her voice breaking. I brought them into our lives. I should have never agreed to their loan. I should have told you everything sooner. I put Lena in danger because I was too weak, too afraid to stand up to them. The self-loathing was a bitter taste in her mouth, a poison that seeped into every cell. The weight of her culpability was crushing, suffocating. She felt utterly helpless, utterly alone in her despair. Julian reached out, his hand clasping her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were cold, hard, but beneath the ice, Anya saw a terrifying, protective fire. Listen to me, Anya. The only weakness here was the assumption that I would not protect what is mine. That assumption will be their undoing. You worry about nothing but Lena, and I will bring her back. His words were a balm to her shattered soul, a promise carved in stone. But then the final devastating blow. Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. He looked at Anya, his gaze suddenly dark with a fresh wave of concern, a fear he tried to mask but couldn't quite conceal. What is it? Anya whispered, her voice barely audible, dread coiling in her gut. They've moved Lena, he said, his voice clipped, controlled. And they've sent an untraceable message. An ultimatum. If I don't appear alone with a painting and abandoned warehouse on the docks by midnight, they will send a piece of her literally with the morning tide. His eyes, usually so devoid of emotion, now held a terrifying, desperate glint. He wouldn't lose her. He couldn't. The fear of failure, of losing someone he now considered his, was raw in his gaze. Anya stared at him, her blood running cold. Midnight. A piece of her. The words were a hammer blow to her already fragile sanity. Absolute despair washed over her, a crushing darkness that threatened to consume her whole. She felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness, a chilling realization that Lena's life now hung by the slimmest, most precarious thread, and Julian, her only hope, was walking straight into a trap. Alone. No, she screamed, lunging forward, gripping his arm with desperate strength. You can't go alone. It's a suicide mission. They'll kill you. They'll kill you both. Her voice was a desperate, panicked plea, but her words were already fading into the deafening roar of Julian's unshakable resolve. His eyes, fixed on some unseen horizon, were burning with a terrifying, singular purpose. He would go. He would retrieve what was his. And no one, absolutely no one, would stand in his way. Anya knew, with chilling certainty, that this was the night everything would either be saved or irrevocably lost. The world outside Julian's study had descended into a controlled chaos. Anya, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, watched him, a silent, terrified witness to his transformation. The man who had discussed the nuances of a Rembrandt with her, who had shown a rare, fleeting vulnerability, was gone. In his place stood the chilling embodiment of the Mafia boss, a force of nature about to unleash a storm. Julian moved with a terrifying precision, his face a mask carved from ice and granite. He shed the cashmere sweater, revealing a crisp black tactical shirt that hugged the powerful lines of his torso. The sleeves, rolled up to his elbows, exposed forearms corded with muscle, adorned with dark, intricate tattoos that seemed to pulse with a life of their own under the stark light. He strapped a holstered pistol to his back, then checked a series of smaller blades hidden in various places, each movement economical, deadly. The metallic glint of steel was a chilling counterpoint to the refined art that adorned his walls. Vince! Julian's voice, a low snarl, ripped through the room. His consigliere, a man built like a fortress, entered, his face grim. Boss, every unit, every man capable of holding a weapon, converge on the South Docks. Warehouse 17. The Obsidian Hand. I want their leader, alive if possible. But if not, I want his head. Julian's gaze, dark and lethal, swept over Anya, who stood frozen, barely breathing. And make sure Ms. Petrova and Mrs. Rossi are confined to the panic room. Secure. No exceptions. No communications. Anya lunged forward, grabbing his arm, her fingers digging into the hard muscle. No. Julian, please. I'm coming with you. I can't. He gripped her face, his thumb pressing hard against her jaw, forcing her to look into his eyes. They burned with a cold, righteous fury, a fire that promised destruction. You will do as you're told, Anya. You are my responsibility. Lena is my responsibility. And I do not risk what is mine on a whim. You will be safe, and I will bring her back. Do you understand? His voice was low, absolute, vibrating with a promise of brutal vengeance. She wanted to argue, to fight, but the sheer force of his will, the deadly certainty in his gaze, rendered her speechless. She could only nod, tears blurring her vision. He released her, then gave a quick, sharp nod to Vince. Move. Anya was hustled into a subterranean panic room, a sterile, windowless vault beneath the mansion, by stoic Mrs. Rossi. The thick steel door hissed shut, sealing her in. The muffled sounds of the mansion emptying, the distant roar of engines, faded into an oppressive silence. Hours crawled by, each second an eternity, stretching Anya's nerves to breaking point. She paced the small room, a caged animal, her mind a torment of terrifying scenarios. Lena's frightened face. Julian's cold, dangerous resolve. The image of the wilted lily, a grim omen. She blamed herself, utterly, for this nightmare. Her heart screamed for both of them, two people now irrevocably intertwined in her desperate, terrified love. Meanwhile, Julian moved like a man possessed. He drove his armored SUV with a controlled ferocity, the powerful engine roaring through the deserted streets towards the South Docks. The air was thick with the scent of salt, decaying fish, and an unspoken promise of violence. Behind him, a convoy of black vehicles, each packed with his most trusted men, followed in silent, deadly pursuit. Vince, riding shotgun, occasionally offered updates, his voice clipped and precise. Intel suggests a skeleton crew inside, boss. They're confident. Overconfident. Julian merely grunted, his hands flexing on the steering wheel, knuckles white. His mind was a cold, calculating machine, mapping out every angle, every weakness. The Obsidian Hand had made a fatal error. They had touched what belonged to him. They would pay. In blood. The abandoned warehouse loomed out of the swirling fog from Lake Michigan, a hulking skeletal structure against the bruised midnight sky. No lights. No overt signs of life. Just a suffocating stillness that whispered of menace. Julian brought his SUV to a screeching halt, his men spilling out of their vehicles, weapons drawn, moving with silent, practiced efficiency. Perimeter secure, Vince reported, his voice low over the comms. Entry points identified. Julian, a black shadow against the dimness, was already moving, leading the charge towards a rusted side door. He was not merely directing, he was hunting. His mind, usually so occupied with the complex machinations of his empire, was now pared down to a singular, brutal instinct: retrieve, destroy. The door buckled under Vince's powerful kick, tearing away from its hinges with a metallic shriek that echoed through the vast, empty space. The interior was a cavern of shadows, permeated by the stench of damp concrete, stagnant water, and fear. Julian's men fanned out, their movements disciplined, their presence a wave of inexorable force. Lena. Anya's desperate cry from earlier echoed in his mind, fueling a cold, incandescent rage. He moved through the labyrinthine aisles of decaying crates and machinery, his senses heightened, his weapon a silent extension of his will. The first shots rang out, deafening in the enclosed space, followed by guttural shouts and the sickening thud of bodies. Julian was in his element, a force of unparalleled destruction. He flowed through the chaos, a dark wraith, striking with brutal efficiency. A quick, precise shot. A silent, lethal knife thrust. He didn't waste movement, didn't waste lives, except those of his enemies. He was a storm, and the obsidian hand was caught in its eye. He kicked open a reinforced steel door, revealing a dimly lit room. Two men, hardened thugs, stood guard, their faces twisted with surprise. Julian didn't hesitate. Two swift, precise shots to the head, and they crumpled. His eyes scanned the room, ignoring the fallen, searching. And then he saw her. Lena. She was huddled in a corner, tied to a chair, her small body trembling, her eyes wide with terror, a gag around her mouth muffling her choked sobs. Her usually bright hair was disheveled, her little dress dirty. But she was alive. The sight of her, so vulnerable, so utterly innocent in this brutal hell, sent a wave of icy calm through Julian, sharpening his focus to a diamond's edge. Lena. Anya's voice, a raw, desperate cry, sliced through the tense silence. She had somehow impossibly broken out of the panic room and followed his men. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fierce determination. She ran past his men, past the dangers, directly towards her sister. Julian's breath hitched. Foolish, reckless woman. But the surge of protectiveness, of possessive love, that ripped through him was so violent it nearly buckled him. He barked an order to Vince, who had just entered the room, to secure Anya. But it was too late. She was already at Lena's side, fumbling with the ropes, murmuring soothing words, tears streaming down her face. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows behind Anya, the leader of the Obsidian Hand, a gaunt, sneering man Anya recognized as the one who had threatened her at the auction. He held a switchblade to Anya's throat, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. Drop your weapons, Volkov, or your little art expert gets a new red stain on her pretty dress. Anya froze, the cold steel against her skin a terrifying reality. Lena let out a muffled whimper of terror. Julian's eyes went flat, colder than the deepest abyss. All trace of humanity, of warmth, of anything but pure, unadulterated fury vanished from his face. You made a mistake, he growled, his voice a low, guttural rumble that vibrated with suppressed violence. You touched what is mine. Twice. That is unforgivable. The Obsidian Hand leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You think you can just waltz in here and take what you want, Volkov? Not this time. Drop it, or she dies. Julian didn't drop his weapon. Instead, with a speed that defied human reflexes, he raised his pistol. But he didn't aim at the leader. He aimed at the ceiling, above Anya's head. A single, deafening shot echoed, reverberating through the warehouse, showering them with dust and plaster. The unexpected sound, the sheer force of the blast, made the leader flinch, his grip on Anya's throat momentarily loosening. It was all Julian needed. He moved, a blur of dark motion. Before anyone could react, he had closed the distance. His hand, strong and swift, snatched the leader's wrist, twisting it with brutal force. A sickening crack echoed in the silence. The switchblade clattered to the floor. The leader screamed, a high-pitched, pathetic sound. Julian didn't release him. He brought his knee up, sharply, precisely, into the man's gut. The leader doubled over, gasping for air. Julian then grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against a grimy metal pillar. His face, inches from the terrified man's, was a tableau of pure, unadulterated rage. You lay your filthy hands on her again, Julian snarled, his voice low and guttural, or on her sister, and I will burn your entire existence to ashes. Every man, you know. Every asset you own. Every memory of your miserable life will be wiped from this city. She is mine. Mine. And what belongs to Julian Volkov is untouchable. Remember that, because it will be the last thing you ever remember. He then shoved the whimpering man into Vince's waiting arms. Take him, and make sure he understands the true meaning of regret. Let him live, but ensure he wishes he hadn't. The order was delivered with such cold, terrifying conviction that even Vince, a hardened killer, nodded with a grim understanding. Julian turned, his gaze sweeping over Anya and Lena. Anya, still trembling, had untied Lena and was clutching her tightly. Lena buried her face in Anya's neck, whimpering. Julian walked towards them, his footsteps echoing in the sudden, profound silence of the warehouse. His men, having cleared the remaining resistance, stood in a respectful perimeter, their faces edged with a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction. Anya looked up at Julian, her eyes wide, a myriad of emotions swirling within their depths: terror, relief, and a dawning, terrifying awe at the raw, untamed power he had unleashed. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster. Her savior. He knelt, his powerful frame surprisingly gentle as he looked at Lena. "Hey, little one," he murmured, his voice softer than Anya had ever heard it. "You're safe now. Daddy will take care of everything." He reached out, his large hand brushing Lena's hair, a gesture of almost paternal tenderness. Then his eyes, dark and possessive, rose to meet Anya's. "You are safe, Anya," he said, his voice low, a definitive claim that vibrated through her very bones. "Both of you. This is done. They will never touch you again. Because you are mine. And what is mine, is protected." Absolutely. The claim was not a question, not an offer. It was a statement of undeniable, terrifying fact, sealing their fate. And in that moment, despite the brutal violence she had witnessed, Anya felt a profound, overwhelming sense of security, a belonging. She was claimed. Completely. And the chilling depth of his possessive love was both her prison and her salvation. Sometimes, the greatest acts of love are born from our most desperate moments, aren't they? Anya's impossible choice, her integrity against Lena's life, reminds us that even when forced into shadows, our true worth isn't diminished, it shines brightest. Julian, the dangerous mafia boss, saw past her fear and claimed her not as a weakness, but as a masterpiece to protect, healing his own scars by fiercely guarding hers. If you've ever felt trapped, yet found unexpected strength or a love that rebuilds you, know your past doesn't define your capacity for a beautiful future. If this journey resonated with your soul, please hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, "I am worthy of a love that protects and heals." Join our family of resilient hearts.